what's one piece of advice you'd give to actors in terms of being their own publicists?
I think just like on a purely personal level, I think you just have to keep reminding yourself that you're not in competition with anyone. And I think sometimes the industry tends to make talent feel like they're in competition with each other when they're actually not. And when the time is right, like the time is right and it's going to happen for you.
Hello, and welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's The Business Program. I'm Lori HAMMEL, actor, author, and SAG-AFTRA member. And also, if you enjoy this kind of programming, consider liking this video and subscribing to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's YouTube channel. And now, without any more ado here, we are going to introduce our wonderful panelists today, and we certainly appreciate having them here. Michelle Schwartz, MARIANNA SHAFRAN, and GAYLE KHAIT. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Great to have you here. So let's just get started. What is the role of a publicist? What do you do? GAYLE, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I like to think being a publicist as part of, first of all, it's a business decision is when you want to hire a publicist, but I like to think of, there's the art that you create that is the first part, and then getting it out into the world is the second part. And our job is to help you get it out in the world in the way that you want to tell your story of how you created your art and who you are in the business world.
Fabulous. MARIANNA?
Yeah, I like to think of it sort of like in two components. Like on a macro level, I think a publicist helps facilitates the talent's relationship with the public. And helps develop a healthy personal brand on their terms. I think on a micro level, they help develop relationships with the press. And in the long term, you want the press to be your allies. And you want to establish an allyship, whereas these press get excited to follow your trajectory, to tell your narrative, to tell your story on the terms that you want it to be told. So that's how I kind of like to think about it.
That's great. And Michelle?
I agree with GAYLE and MARIANNA. I think, you can think of publicity as one essential part of your team when you're ready. So you have your agent, you have your manager, you may have a lawyer. If all the wheels are turning correctly, then, everything is the way it's supposed to be when you get to a point that you want to take on a publicist. And I think we are really in service of your work. And we are there to be a conduit between you and the media and to help you feel safe. Because, obviously getting out there in the world as yourself, not acting, can be very scary. So we're also there to provide guidance on that front.
Great. Thank you so much. So those are some really great descriptions. And during this conversation, I would really like to bring forward things like when it's the right time for people to start working with a publicist, the ways that you work together that are best and most effective, those kinds of things. And those have been some of the questions that have been coming in this week. But first of all, one question that came up is, how do you find potential clients? What criteria do you use?
Sure. So I think for me, there's sort of two ways that I find new clients. One is built upon the relationships that I already have. So, working with talent reps at the agencies, so managers and agents, I think once they work with, whatever publicist they work with and they see that they have done a good job and there's a rapport there, then of course, the referrals start coming in. So that's one way is just, from our point of view, we build relationships with agents and managers, and then they refer clients to us. And there's people that we end up working with a lot because we have similar tastes and similar, work styles. And then the other is over the years, I love film and TV. And so I'll just be watching something and, if somebody moves me, I'll look that person up. And if they're not represented, then sometimes I'll reach out coldly. And, that has actually provided me with some of the most fruitful experiences work-wise. So yeah, I would say those two ways are how I personally find business.
Fabulous. Gayle, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, as Michelle said, referrals is a big part of it, either from agents and managers or, sometimes from studio or network publicists. If they, have a talent who's wanting to hire, they may recommend us. And then, I don't know, people just come to us from sort of word of mouth of other people they may know in the industry and say, oh, I think you should look up this person. As Michelle also alluded to, I think at the end of the day, we're also fans, of movies and television, and we're consuming that as well. And, you might see somebody and you get really excited about them and say, hey, I wonder if that person has a publicist. And you just sort of dive in. And that's, to answer the second part of your question, is sort of one of the things that I look for. Is it somebody that I'm excited about, them as a performer, the kind of projects that they're in, and then I think I'd be a good match for and could do a good job for.
Great, thank you. And Marianna?
Yeah. Again, I think what Gayle and Michelle said, that it comes down to relationships with managers and agents and studio execs. But also just, I think it's doing your due diligence and seeing who the media singles out as like the potential breakouts of a movie or a TV show. If you're at a festival, if you're at, Sundance or Toronto, Venice, and you have the opportunity to go see films and somebody catches your eye during one of those festivals, I think that's another great way of seeking out talent. And then sometimes, again, like, I think you just sort of follow someone's work and they may not have necessarily done a lot, but you just have this, like, as silly as it sounds, this gut feeling in your stomach that this person is going to be, a breakout. I had a similar feeling when I signed Winston Duke from Black Panther. I had seen some of his previous, guest appearances on TV shows, and there wasn't a lot, but I thought, this guy is charismatic. I've seen a couple of interviews. He's super charming. He's personable. I think this guy has something. And so, leading up to the release of Black Panther, I was hustling. I was stalking his agent. I was taking them out, it's a feeling that you get, and there's a lot of competition. I mean, Michelle and Gayle are amazing publicists, so you have to make your way. It's a hustle.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I think it's so interesting because actors are generally pretty familiar, for instance, with what an agent does, what a manager does, what a casting director does. We've been exposed to these, but these different jobs, but I'm really interested in, what does a typical day look like for you? Michelle, do you want to let us know, like, what are the things that you do in a typical work day as a publicist?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I can say with certainty that no day is the same. So it's kind of a hard question to answer because we can be here all day. But it keeps things really exciting. I think the crux of our job is building media relationships and talking to our clients, talking to the media about our clients. So the first step is that we have to be on board with our clients and their projects and really understand them in full, and understand our clients, projects in the short term, but then future goals in the long term, so that when we're talking to the media, we are constructing the conversation, in accordance with how we built the strategy for each client. And so that is really, I would say, the nuts and bolts of public relations, is building out relationships with the media. And as we're in 2022, that's really evolving. So, 15 years ago, it was a very simple list, of certain print magazines and broadcast, et cetera. But obviously now that's all changed. So there's new media, which is now old media, which is, social media, and just tons of different ways to get through and cut through the noise. So that, that's what we try to do every day. And with that comes, taking editors out, getting to know writers, knowing who writes about what, and building those relationships. And then, we're the liaison between the studios and networks. So if you are working on a show with NBC, we're the connection point and we are talking to the show's publicist or the film's publicist to make sure that we're up to speed on what's going on, to intervene. So they may be bringing things to the table that, you know, they want the cast to do, but that may not make sense for the client. So we're in constant communication with those teams. We're in communication with, you know, their agents and managers to know what's going on. We're doing casting announcements and, you know, all various trade announcements that come with new projects for talent. And then, you know, you have sort of the reactive crisis things that come up every day, that we all, you know, have dealt with over the years that you are really not expected. And, you know, things can pop up at any point in time and take up your whole day or multiple days.
Exactly. Boy, it sounds like quite a variety of things similar to actors, you know, and no day usually looks exactly the same either. Marianna, do you want to let us know a little bit about how you navigate your day?
I think Michelle kind of summed it, but yeah, I mean, there's no one typical day. Like, you know, one day you could be at the office, you know, pitching various press, depending on the season. And when I mean season, it could be like Emmy season, it could be Oscar season. You could be working with the studio to craft an awards campaign for your client. You could be on a tour with a client promoting their film. A month ago, I never would have thought that I would be in Rwanda with a client filming a piece for CBS Sunday Morning News on them becoming an ambassador for a global health organization. So it really just runs the spectrum. And I think that's what makes it exciting. You just really never know what the day is going to bring. And also like how and what you can do to help elevate your client's career and take them to the next level. I think that's what makes it most exciting.
And for you, GAYLE?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they really covered it, you know, and it could be any and all of those things in one day. You know, I like to think of it as, I don't know, there's the creative side, and then there's sort of the more practical side. So on the creative side, it might be about sort of writing bios or talking points, or even just strategizing story angles for your client. And then there's the practical side of sort of carrying those things out. Sort of once you start doing the interviews, it's the schedules and the transportation and the hair and makeup. And in between, as you know, Michelle said, you're, you know, constantly developing and expanding your relationships with the press to make that, you know, that all feel better. So it's, I feel like we use sort of all parts of our brain in the course of a day. And it makes it very exciting, to use a word, a positive word. I mean, it can be obviously exhausting, you know, and sometimes, you know, the thing that you really, really wanted to do that day has to get pushed to the back burner because something more immediate comes up. And you know, you sort of have to, we're always walking that line of what is a priority for this moment and what can sort of wait until later.
And I think the part that I may surprise some actors that are watching is also, you know, the artistic part of it and following your gut, as you said, you know, that Marianna was talking about, that and following people that you're excited about, that spark your interest, that you are watching their work, and that is creating in you some excitement to want to get more people to know about this person. So it's very interesting, the line that you all walk, what part of the brain that you're using, and you know, also that it's so unpredictable in terms of what you're working with. And I would imagine something like damage control that, you know, has to happen sometimes because of things that may come out that aren't expected. Like you were saying, Michelle, it sounded like that you were touching on that a little bit, that might have to be taken care of that day. And those other priorities kind of go to the wayside in that moment. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And something I think that falls in line right now with what we're talking about, what's your philosophy on media training? How do you do it? What are some important points to hit? because you're talking, Marianna, you're talking about being on tour with somebody. So how do you feel about media training?
I mean, I think it can be super beneficial. Also, like depending on where that person is on their career. If you're signing someone with a brand new project who's potentially just out of drama school, then that can be of enormous help. If you're, working with someone who's been established, then they don't necessarily need media training. But I think it's even helpful for someone who's been doing it for 10, 15 years, if they can even brush up on their skills. I think with the media constantly evolving, and I think media training is of enormous help. So I'm never against it. And if the studio is willing to pay for it, even better.
And GAYLE, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think it's enormously beneficial, not only for someone starting out. I mean, it's important at different times of your career for different reasons. So when you are starting out, it's really important, to help you just crystallize what you want to say about yourself and about the project, and also just sort of to help you learn to navigate questions that maybe you're not that comfortable with. For example, you can always say, "That's an interesting question. Let me think about that and come back to you." Or you can answer a completely different question than that has been asked. So that becomes very important to understand. And at the same time, it can be helpful if you have a project with sort of deep or challenging themes, and you just kind of want to make sure everybody who's on the filmmaking team and the actors sort of understand what the important themes are and are using sort of similar language in order to get the point across about that film. So that sort of everyone's on the same message. So we use it sort of all the time, either formal training or just sort of creating talking points that we then sort of discuss amongst ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense. Michelle?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, every time a client does a media training session, they always walk away feeling like it was a great use of their time and feeling like they have more tools to answer tough questions or just to be more succinct, in what they're saying. And these media trainers that kind of or go around between the studios and networks, because they are expensive, are really wonderful and at the top of their game. So I would always encourage anybody, if they have the chance, to do a media training session.
Have you ever worked with trans non-binary talent? If so, what have you found to be unique challenges and or opportunities when working with this new subset of talent? Does someone want to jump in?
I can give it a go.
Yes.
I have, and I think it's a challenge in that you really need to know the particulars of where they're coming from, the language that you want to make sure that you get their narrative across by using the specific language that they want you. Do you know what I mean? Because I think if you're not using that specific language, then things are going to go really haywire for you in the worst way possible. But I think, in some ways, I think their stories are the most interesting because I think, I don't know, I come from an immigrant family. And so as growing up, I listened to stories about how they kind of struggled to find a voice and a place in society. And so I think I tend to sort of gravitate maybe towards clients with that common theme of a struggle of invisibility and how they try to find their voice in society and inhabit, what kind of place do they inhabit in this larger audience. And so I think those to me are the most interesting stories and also an educational lesson. So
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful, Marianna.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
What would you say is the best way to approach and seek out a publicist? You were all talking earlier about the relationships that you already have with other with agents, managers, and so how would what are the best ways to approach and seek out a publicist? Anyone want to take that?
I mean, I think it's kind of the same in reverse. So you may, if you have agent or manager, sort of start with them and ask if they have a recommendation. You can ask other actor friends that you may know. But now, with sort of the internet, it's a little easier to do research, and you may, find somebody that you admire, like the way their press or their public image has been handled, and then find out who they work with from that way. There's also, if you're at festivals or if you're, again, your studio or network publicist, there's a lot of opportunities to just connect with people.
Great. At what stage of your career do you recommend finding a publicist? Michelle, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that is a question that is, first probably a discussion with your agent or manager. But I think it can vary, and it's not always the same answer. I think in an ideal world, someone who, sort of a no-brainer, someone who's a lead of a project, right? Especially because they're going to be getting a lot of probably incoming requests anyway from the studio network. And you really, if you are in this career for the long run, you want to make sure that you're protected and that you're looking out for your long-term career, not just the show or movie at hand. And so that's, sort of an easy one if you're the lead. If you're not the lead, but you're, supporting in a project that is getting a lot of buzz, whether it's going to be in some of the bigger festivals or it was being distributed by, a major film studio, that is also a time to probably raise a flag to a team member, a manager, an agent, and say, hey, do you think this makes sense for me to take on a publicist? Publicity is different than this fee structure is different than agents and managers. So we're not built into your compensation. You are paying monthly for it. So, we obviously want to make sure that our clients are in a place that they can afford it. But I will say I've worked with many people over the years that have had the foresight, even with their first project out of the gate, to know that this is going to be a project to capitalize on. And I think that's really set them up for success, because you really can only get that first introduction to the media that, if you were starting out, I guess you should say, one time. I think you can have it several times in your career, but that first time you want to make sure is the right time. And so a lot of times we will be upfront and say, look, we don't know that you're there yet. And we wouldn't want to bring you on without being sure that we could get the results that we think you deserve. So we definitely will assess the situation and be upfront with the potential client or their team, about where we think that they're at. So it is a bit of a fine line, or if there's just if you have a really interesting story to tell and that coincides with something that you're doing, or that may be of more importance to you than the project, there's a lot of variations of it. It's not just a quick answer, but that hopefully is a little bit helpful.
I think that's very helpful. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground. Marianna, would you like to add anything that you find for yourself when you are thinking about someone, or that there would be an actor and trying to decide when is the right time for them to start working with a publicist?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think if they're part of an ensemble TV show or ensemble film where they have a special storyline, or there's a special narrative to their personal story that I think would be, interesting to be told. So that's an aspect of it. I mean, I think I agree with Michelle in that I also tend to get a handful of people that come to me that they're like, I'm doing 2 guest spots on this TV show. I think this is my moment. I'm like, I don't want to take someone on just for the sake of taking someone on. I want to make sure that the project is worth it, because it's a financial investment and it's expensive, and you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. So I think it's, it's a combination of like timing of the project, of what you want to get out of it, what your team wants to get out of it. There's multiple factors that, go into taking on a publicist, I think.
Mhm.
I think, Marianna, you hit on something really important, which is that I think when we look to work with people, we're looking at this as a long-term relationship, and it's one that sort of has to build over time. So, we want everyone to sort of feel like this is the time to start on this project, on this process of developing you and your brand. Like I said at the beginning, I think of the decision to hire a publicist as a business decision, and sort of in the macro view of, when you're ready to sort of take charge of your brand and your story and grow that to help yourself in your career. Because just to backtrack a little bit, there are obviously different kinds of publicists, and the studio and the network publicists, they have their objective, which is to open the project, to get as many eyeballs to sort of support their overall corporate goal. And that certainly intersects with your goals as an actor, but it's not necessarily the same. And I think part of our job is to massage that timeline and make it beneficial for everybody. So for example, you're an actor, you may have, let's say you have 2 or 3 projects coming out in a year. The first studio out of the gate, of course, would want you to do everything for them, but then that doesn't work for the other 2 films you have. So we would sort of work with them, who I consider our partners, to just find happiness in a place for everybody, but that ultimately supports you and your long range goals. Because to me, that's what publicity is all about. It's not about being more famous. It's not about getting, to go to parties or events. It really is about supporting you in your career and the story that you want to have for that career, and to help you ultimately do more of the kind of work that you want to do. So if, somebody who loves and wants to do independent, writer-actor type films, it's going to be a different conversation, a different strategy than somebody who wants to do sort of blockbusters. And so it's that, to me, is sort of the goal. And so when you're ready to sort of think about that, I feel like that's the time to have the conversation.
Wow, lots to think about for people. Something that keeps coming up, it seems like in the conversation, is about protecting the actor and protecting the image that they want to put out there, and to curate the story of the person that you want to put out there. So it sounds like there's a lot of massaging of, like putting the stories together and getting those particulars out to the media. And I love how you're also talking about the relationships that you already have with the media, so that you can navigate that more easily. And that's, of course, why an actor would want to work with someone who is a pro in this and has been doing it for some time, because you'll get those relationships. Am I right about that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Answer this how you will, but it's about cost. And so people are wondering how it works with paying for a publicist. Of course, give the details that you feel are appropriate to give out in this situation, but we are getting questions about that. Would anyone like to address that?
sure. I think Michelle mentioned this, but so we're paid on a retainer fee. I tend to at least try to have clients sign on for a 3-month period. I think it takes, especially for someone who's breaking out into the industry, I think it takes a while for sort of the gas to get going. You're setting up meetings with them for editors, you're introducing them to people. It's a process. So I think it takes a while. I think, it's based on a fee structure. I can say I think most companies charge between 5 and 7 these days, but can let the gals speak for themselves too.
And how about if someone is coming into a situation where they're looking at maybe a nomination that they have for something coming up? How much in advance, do you even start working with someone? Let's say they're like, okay, I'm nominated for this. I want to be working with someone. How do you work something like that out?
So for awards campaigns, in an ideal world, we'd be working with that person prior to the campaign started, the awards part of the campaign starting, so that we would be up to speed and be fully integrated into the team. But if somebody, hadn't had a publicist for that and then decides to, which does happen if they feel that there's some more awards momentum, it really depends. I mean, we all know the calendar really well. So, for Emmys, Emmys are in September and the voting period is in June. The first voting period and the second voting period is in August. So, but before that, there's a lot of work to be done just to get into the conversation. So I always, time is money for all of us. So, for my clients that come on for the Emmys, if they can do it, I recommend coming on in February or March. And then for the Oscars, that's a whole different beast, because these days it's like pretty much starts at Toronto and ends in March for the actual award show. So it's really depending on like when the movie is running and, what work there is to be done. But the Oscar voting window is in January. So the work would need to be done before then, because pieces of media come out during that time period. And obviously that takes time to pitch and secure and schedule and all of that.
That's great. I think that's really helpful to our audience. Thank you so much. Gail, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just as you said, in terms of timing on a regular campaign, I usually would like to start at least a couple of months before the release date. When you're talking about awards, that can be a long process. You take a film, for example, that premieres at Cannes in May, and then the Oscars aren't until the following February or March. So it can be a very long process in terms of awards, but that's a conversation we'd have. But yes, I mean, generally we work on a fee retainer, minimum of 3 months, in order to lay the groundwork, get to know each other, which is also a really big, important part of it, and how each other works, and then go from there.
Great, thank you. This question just came in. Do publicists generally give consultations to artists to determine if the time is right for them to hire a publicist? Do you ever find yourself in that position?
I do. I mean, I think, you take a meeting if you're referred by someone, or you set up a meeting and you have that conversation. And then sometimes as we're learning more about them, then we realize, this isn't really the time for that. This actually happened to me a few weeks ago where the person, their project just wasn't ready yet. They didn't have a set release date. So there wasn't a specific conversation we could have. It's a little bit premature. Because I know that this is very, sort of can be complicated stuff, I do, sort of like to talk to sort of young filmmakers, young actors, just generally about the process, and sort of just help give them some tools to understand what it is. But if we're talking about someone who's really coming to me as a potential client, then I try to do my homework before the meeting as well, and learn as much as I can about them and the project they have coming up, and what the timeline is, and sort of, who the studio or network people might be, and sort of help to make that decision by the time we meet.
That's great. What makes a dream client for you? Like, what are the elements of somebody who is that you love working with? What do you feel like is the way that it works between the two of you? Can you identify any part of that for you, Michelle, your dream clients?
Yeah, I think, open communication on both sides of the lane is really important. So having we have a direct line to our clients. We're on text chains, phone conversations, emails, every which way to communicate, and feeling that we have a mutual trust, so that they feel that they're in a safe space to tell us what is either upsetting to them, where their vulnerabilities are, things like that. And also where they can be honest with their goals, and, we can be honest back with them. And I think that kind of relationship is the best way for a long relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Marianna?
Yeah, I think definitely what Michelle was speaking to about like clear communication. I'm always telling my clients, just speak up, whether you're happy, angry, frustrated. Tell me your needs, tell me your goals, tell me your desire. Like, what do you want to accomplish out of this relationship? And then on my side, I think it requires and demands a lot of listening, and not imposing what I want for them, but instead listening carefully and knowing how to execute their goals in the best, way possible, and helping them clarify their goals, and helping them communicate their vision. So I think it's definitely, a two-way street where they have to be willing to be, I think, vulnerable with you. Because I think the publicist and the client relationship, I think that's one of the closest, relationships on the team, because you're essentially helping maintain their image, but also you travel with them on tour, you're at a photo shoot with them, you spend a lot of time with them. So you do want to know the ins and outs of their personality, because otherwise, it won't work. And I think even going back to when you first have that meeting, I think you kind of, you'll know, I think, if you click with that person, because essentially I think, GAYLE and Michelle and I, we all know the same people, but it comes down to who we click with the client. If we click with the client, it's going to work. If we don't, doesn't matter who it's a waste of your money, and it's a waste of time, period, because it's just not going to work. It has to be a fruitful relationship, and communication has to work on both sides. And if doesn't work, then better to part ways and say, we gave it a go, but there's probably a better fit for you out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was really on the nose. Definitely about trust. And we like to think of it as a partnership. And it is a two-way street of listening and respecting each other. I want to really hear my clients, what their values are, what is important to them. And at the same time, I want a client who sort of respects the work that I do on their behalf. And if we sort of, those things are lacking, then it's not going to be a fruitful relationship. When you are meeting with somebody and you get to the point when you're meeting with publicists, you really should meet with, several people to see what they feel like. And if you think they get you, who you are, at your essence and what it is you're trying to do, because, that's just going to make it a better process for you, more fun, more you feel like you're supported, but it's also going to make it better for us too. And you're going to get better work from us if we feel that connection and that we're all pulling together in the same direction.
It's so interesting, this theme coming up too of communication, because it seems like that is also what's so important with your reps, for an actor, with their agents, with their managers, because if they're being sent out for things that they don't really want to do, that doesn't excite the actor, it doesn't excite, and things could be going in a different direction than what the client, the actor, was anticipating with it. And so it seems like just having that good communication and having a great connection is where it sounded to me that's what it really starts with. And to hear that you're actively looking for people that, that you connect with because of their work. And I think at the very beginning too, I think, Gayle, maybe you brought up about the work, that's where it starts, and then having those separate components of the work and then getting the work that's out there. So that I really appreciate, I know our audience does too, how much you're breaking it down for everyone to see, kind of, pull the curtain and see what goes on behind successful campaigns that you all had, and helping actors get to a new level with their work and with visibility around who they are and the projects that they're involved in and what they are passionate about. That's very exciting. It really is, thinking about that. Can you share your challenges as a publicist in this age of social media? What are some tips you can give our base about navigating the digital age? Any suggestions? Gayle, do you want to start?
I was hoping you wouldn't start here.
Oh.
No, I mean, it is rough out there. So I think the best advice I can say is to be authentically yourself. If there is something that you are not sure about, don't post it because you can't take it back. And, always keep in mind what is the goal, And I think if you're using it as a business tool, keep it focused as a business tool. Yes, you might share a little bit about this about your family just to keep it personalized. But if it's a business tool, just keep it professional, and maybe try to avoid sort of wading into some of those landmines that are so easy to find on social media these days.
Mm-hmm. For you, Michelle?
Yes, I would agree with all of that. I think, in this day and age, no matter what you do, on social media, it seems like there's a chance you're going to get into trouble, even if you're just posting a picture with something in the background, even if you're tweeting something, that you don't think is going to be problematic. So I think, the best, first of all, just in social media in general, I know this maybe wasn't asked directly, but it may be asked, which is, should I be on social media if I'm not on it? My answer is always, you should follow your gut on it. If you're an actor who's really against social media, I wouldn't encourage somebody to go on just to go on. Now there's different reasons, another team member could say, look, you have the endorsement deals that are paying a lot of money that you need to post, and that's a different conversation. And obviously we would support that. But if it's just about going on yourself, and you're someone who doesn't want to, then I would say that's no problem. There's ways to navigate that. There's plenty of people that are really successful and are not on social media. And if you are on social media, I think, it's really being careful about what it is that you're doing, and, using the platform to healthfully promote the projects that you're in. And if you are, like Gayle said, wading into that personal territory, then, having a hard think about what you're posting before you're posting it. Because like everybody said, even if it goes out and you delete it, people will still find it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marianna?
I think on a purely personal level, I think you have to make sure you're in the right headspace to be on social media, because I've had clients that have joined social media and then, months later, they're talking to me about the detrimental effects that it's had on their sanity and how it's led them towards depression. And so I think you really have to make sure you're in the right headspace to even do social media and maintain it, because I think once you're on it, you have to, maintain it. You have to, just like curating an editorial, an awards campaign, you have to curate a social media campaign. And I think if you're not in that headspace, if you're not healthy enough to be on social media at this point in your life, then you're not able to really, I think, clearly see yourself. You know, the healthier you are, the clearer you can see yourself, the clearer you can communicate your needs to me, and the clearer you communicate your needs to me, the better I am at executing the campaign. So I think it also has to do a lot with your headspace. And so that's definitely like one of the tougher conversations that I have with my clients before they join social media. Are you confident enough right now to do this? Are you just in the right headspace to do this? Because it might lead you down a rabbit hole of depression, of sadness. And is that something that you're okay to deal with at this point in your life or not? And if not, then it's not really worth it. It's most definitely not worth it in the end.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. We had a question that came up. How do you promote projects with NDAs?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So there's a big hush hush about it before it comes out, or the age, you know, for the actor having to sign those NDAs and not being able to talk about it, but still wanting to create buzz about it. That's the way I was looking at the way that this question came in.
I would think if a project where you sign an NDA, at some point the studio and the filmmakers would decide this is sort of the time to talk about it, and this is how we'd like you to talk about it. I can't imagine that it would carry over to the promotion end of it. Clearly, there are certain plot points that they don't want you to reveal. But I don't know anything about a specifically NDA of not being able to talk about a project at all.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, I definitely have talked about projects or clients have talked about projects that they really couldn't say much about the project. And that happens all the time. And I think when that's the case, you know, you work with the studio network on the points you can say, and then a lot of it becomes about what was it like during the filming process? What was it like to work with that actor, that director? So it becomes a different kind of conversation, you know, than discussing the actual project.
That makes a lot of sense. And GAYLE, you were talking earlier about being able to navigate questions, like being able to reroute it, or to when the actor is in a situation where they're talking about a project. It sounds like, you know, a lot of it may be also that the actor talking with you about the way that you want to move forward, and then just finding a path that seems to work, which I would imagine would work with an NDA or other aspects about what you want to help that actor have broadcast, and to keep the other things, like to keep steering it so that it's not getting into a territory that either would be detrimental or really uncomfortable, or even something that would be legal, like with an NDA around maybe plot points and things like that. So we have a question that came in. I'm an actor with a film going to the Toronto International Film Festival. I've never had a publicist, but I'm looking to hire someone to help me navigate the festival. Where do you suggest I start? And maybe we should also add in there, when should they start with that?
I think it depends on how large of a role you have in the project. Is the studio, like something as simple as like, is the studio covering your expenses to come out to Toronto? Is this going to have to come out of pocket? Are you being included in the various stops along the Toronto press, circuit? So I think it's also a conversation with your agents. Do they feel like this is the time for you to join the press circuit? So I think it's a team conversation, and probably a conversation with the studio to sort of investigate how they see you fitting into the campaign, and how we personally can help you fit into the campaign, and what we can do for you.
Michelle, would you like to add more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo everything Marianna said. I think an important component is does this film have distribution, or is it an independent film where the producers, are flying you in? Sometimes I'd argue that Toronto is actually not the place to start with a publicist, because you're already in the machine of Toronto, which is that, you're going to this different studios. So for example, all the trades and like people in IMDb and EW, they have different places there where you do photos and you do cast, and it's all with the cast if you're one of the main actors in the movie. So it's actually probably a decent time to just go get the experience and see how you feel, because it's low risk in the sense that you're with your cast. And there's a pretty tight schedule that happens there. There's not a lot of room for deviation at a festival like Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. That's great. All right. Wonderful. We just had so many interesting questions. Someone wrote, how do you engage with IMDb, and how important is it for your clients' profiles? And do you work with them to help manage that? You want to talk a little bit about IMDb and its importance? Gayle, do you want to start us off?
I don't use it a lot as a tool because it's pretty straightforward. I do think you should keep it updated. Keep it with a current photo that you like, and your project's current. But it's pretty, it's pretty much it's a database. So, sort of when it's out there, it's out there. I have worked with them to correct things that are wrong. And that's one way that I interact with them. But other than that, I don't really use them. I use them every day for myself, but in terms of my clients' strategy, it's not a big part.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Marianna?
Yeah, I tend to make sure that it's updated with their current projects. Mm-hmm. If there are specific images that I think would add a nice dimension to the profile, I'll work with IMDb to upload those images. Sometimes I'll have to correct a bio that seems utterly ridiculous, so I'll do that. But I don't necessarily use it as a tool for a strategy. I think it's just one of the sort of like bullet points that I go down with when I'm working with a client. Like, do you have existing images of yourself? Where does your IMDb stand? Do you know what I mean? Do we need to write up a new bio for you? Sort of in that sort of scheme.
Great. And Michelle?
Yeah, same. I use it more for myself to just discover, talent and their teams and things like that. And for me personally, a lot of times the managers will end up, adding the projects to the account. But yeah, I've had, different conversations about pictures and things like that, if need be, if the picture's super old. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I don't use it on the day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So we're wrapping up. A final question, possibly, unless something else comes up that you really want to share with us, is so that many of the actors that are tuning in are just starting out. What's one piece of advice you'd give to actors in terms of being their own publicists? Anything you'd like to say to help people along the way? Gayle, you want to start?
I think it's always helpful and important to make sure you understand how the business works and just sort of get curious about different jobs and what people do and how they do it. Have conversations with people. Again, I think if anything has been a recurring theme today, it's about building relationships. So it's never too soon to start doing that. And then also just along with that, stay informed about what's happening in the business in terms of trends, like what kinds of projects are being made and, how is the press writing about this person or that person? I think that's some groundwork that you can do a little bit every day.
Oh, that's great. Marianna?
I think just like on a purely personal level, I think you just have to keep reminding yourself that you're not in competition with anyone. And I think sometimes the industry tends to make talent feel like they're in competition with each other when they're actually not. And when the time is right, like the time is right and it's going to happen for you. And you have to be patient. And it's even with like PR, you sign with a publicist, like it takes time, it takes effort, it takes the work. But you know, when it breaks, and it's going to be glorious. But you have to be patient with yourself and, you know, don't get discouraged, and timing and listening and having like those conversations with your agents, and don't be afraid to speak up and tell them, I'm not happy with this. I want you to take my career in a different direction. Like, I think a lot of people are really scared of having tough conversations in this industry. And I think that's what's really going to not only build up your self-esteem, but just take you to the next level. So don't be worried about all that outside noise. Concentrate on yourself.
Great. Michelle?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think especially if you're just starting out, like head down and, you know, do the work, and the work meaning acting. And, you know, if there are things that arise on a set, like a unit publicist or, you know, a studio or network publicist that comes in and you're doing press there, you know, definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. Oh, why are we doing this outlet out of curiosity? Or, you know, what are you doing with that footage that you're taking of me? It's, you know, you're totally, you have the right to ask those questions, and you shouldn't do anything that you don't feel comfortable doing. You know, there's some people that really don't want to be doing press while they're doing a movie. And, you know, we understand because maybe you're doing a scene that requires a lot of tough work. And, you know, if we were, you know, and so just feel free to speak up, obviously kindly, but to understand, you know, what it is that's being asked of you. But yeah, I agree. Don't get too concerned with publicity, you know, just focus on your work and it will come at the right time for you.
Oh, that's beautiful. So appreciate your time today and for taking the deep dive on some of these questions, and also introducing these ideas to so many that will be watching this video. We truly appreciate you, Gayle, Marianna, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. And from the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, from me and from all the actors watching, we thank you for the views that you brought, your ideas, and also the inspiration today. It was very, very exciting to hear from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's fun.